Another thing that motivates us is sex. Sex motivation may have evolved to enable creatures to pass on their genes. Sexual motivation is adaptive with those more motivated passing on the greatest number of genes. This makes male promiscuity a successful trait out of many for passing on genes. The difference between hunger and sex is both are necessities for the species, but only hunger is a necessity for the individual. Many people function well with sex as a minor or non existent motivation or drive. The physiology of sexual activity has three components: the sexual response cycle, which has four phases: excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution; disorders of the sexual response cycle; and hormones and sexual behavior. The sexual response cycle. Beginning in the late 1950s, William Masters and Virginia Johnson observed sexual arousal and orgasm to learn about the typical pattern of human response to sexual stimulation. Their findings are shown in the chart. Remember, this study was based on a sample of people willing to be observed in arousal and orgasm. Think about adjustments. What adjustments might we have to make in generalizing the results of the whole population? Do you think that the error of the study or the laboratory conditions limit the applicability of the results? If so, how? How might unobserved spontaneous sexual response be different than these phases seen in the laboratory? Given the era of the study, the initial phase was 1957 to 1965, do you think the results would be different now? The four phases: excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution. In the excitement phase, genitals fill with blood, the vagina secretes lubricant, and the breasts and nipples enlarge. In the plateau phase, everything increases: breathing, blood pressure, pulse, secretions, etc. During an orgasm, the uterus is positioned to receive sperm and increases retention of the positive sperm. During resolution, a man enters a refractory period where he isn't capable of another orgasm for a few minutes up to a day or more. The sexual response disorders. Some people have a variation or impairment in some phase of the sexual response cycle. This includes premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, low sexual desire, and lack of orgasm response. These disorders impair arousal and response. The paraphilias direct arousal and response to objects, situations, or individuals that are not part of the normative response cycle. Psychologists and psychiatrists once believed homosexuality was a disturbance of normative sexual response. In 1973, homosexuality was removed from the DSM-2 classification of mental disorders. Sexual desire and response is not tied to hormonal levels in humans as it is in animals. During ovulation, women show a rise in estrogen and also in testosterone. As this happens, sexual desire rises in women and also in the men around them whose testosterone level rises. Studies show that sexual desires rise in women during their ovulation cycle. The biological, psychological, and socio-cultural influences of sex chart. The effect of external stimuli, aka pornography. All effects of external stimuli on sexual behavior are more common in men than they are in women. However, adverse effects include rape because of men seeing women being sexually coerced. It also devalues partners and relationships because of the depictions of sexually attracted women seen on TV and magazines. The girlfriend or wife are found then less attractive. However, women do enjoy viewing pornography just as much as men. Imagine stimuli. The brain is involved in sexuality. People with no genital sensation, example spinal cord injuries, can feel sexual desire. The brain also contains dreams, memories, and fantasies that stimulate sexual desire. Men fantasize about sex more often, less romantically, and more physically than women. Adolescent sexual activity. Sexual intercourse amongst American women have changed from 3% premarital sex in 1900 to 47% premarital sex in 2005. Teen intercourse is similar in West Europe and Latin America, but much lower in Asian and Arab countries. Family and cultural values also matter to teenagers, which may deter them from having sexual intercourse. Teen pregnancy and contraception. American teens have higher rate of pregnancy and abortion than European teens. Possible reasons include the following bulleted points. American teens have a lower rate of contraception, so a higher rate of pregnancy and abortion. Reasons include ignorance about sex and sexual health. For example, STIs, which is sexually transmitted infections, are transmitted through oral sex, minimal communication about birth control because teens are embarrassed to talk about it with their parents, guilt, most girls say they regret having sex afterwards, alcohol because it depresses the judgment center of the brain, and media because of all the sexual innuendos and making unprotected sex look common and okay. Also, some background information on a later term that we will talk about, which is homosexual. The term homosexual was used in the 1800s. Were there homosexuals before the 1800s? The issue is politically charged and hotly disputed. Clearly, there were people who engaged in homosexual acts, but they had a homosexual identity, may be introducing a modern view of sexuality that was alien to the times. Most pre-modern people viewed sexual acts as homosexual or heterosexual but they did not classify the people performing the acts. Unlike the risk of pregnancy, the risk of STIs multiplies and spreads, and condoms do not offer sufficient protection of STIs like herpes. Sex and bad math. Herb has sex with 9 people, each of whom has 9 other partners, who each have sex with 9 people. To how many people could his STI spread? 511 people. If you don't agree, think about 9 times 9 times 9 equals 729. However, that total in the real world is likely to count some partners twice, so 511 may reduce the number to the likely number of separate individuals potentially contracting the STI. Teenage girls are more vulnerable because they are not fully mature biologically and have lower protective antibodies. 2/3 of new infections occur in people under the age of 25. Factors correlating with sexual restraint. High intelligence test, because people with high intelligence know the consequences are looking towards future achievements, aka they don't want to get pregnant or receive a STI. Also, strong religious beliefs. Teens reserve sex for marital commitments. Presence of a father in the home, which is pretty self-explanatory, and participation in activity helping others. It might help them with personal competence, control, and responsibility. Sexual orientation refers to one's preference as an object of sexual attraction. Homosexual orientation is the attraction to your own sex, whereas heterosexual orientation is attraction to the opposite sex. Identity as either heterosexual, bisexual, or exclusively homosexual emerges in puberty. Sexual preference, especially if it is bisexual or homosexual, may not be revealed or acted on when one's attractions are the subject of prejudice. Does protecting anonymity ensure honest answers about a stigmatized subject? People may worry about information being revealed or tracked despite the promise of anonymity, and they may not want to document a stigmatized behavior even to themselves. This is actually a problem in self-reported surveys, such as those that ask, how happy is your marriage, or how satisfied are you with your life? 40 years ago, homosexuality was considered a psychological disorder. Having a homosexual orientation in today's society still puts one at risk for anxiety and mood disorders because of the stress and discrimination and isolation and the difficulty in finding satisfying loving relationships. During adolescence can be more at risk for thinking and attempting suicide. They may try to deny desires at first, but the feelings typically persist. Theories suggesting that sexual preferences related to parenting behaviors or childhood abuse are not supported by evidence. Differences appear to begin at birth. This could be genetic or could be caused by exposure to hormones or antigens in the womb. The fraternal birth order effect, being born after a brother, increases the likelihood of being gay. Heterosexual men have a certain cell cluster in their hypothalamus that, on average, is larger than gay men and in women. Gay men are more likely than straight men to be poets, fiction writers, artists, and musicians. In animals, same-sex relations have been found in grizzly bears, gorillas, monkeys, flamingos, owls, rams, and other hundreds of species. Sexual orientation is part of a package of traits. Studies, some in need of replication, indicate that homosexuals and heterosexuals differ in the following biological and behavioral traits. It does run in families. Identical twins, more so than fraternal twins, are seen to share homosexual orientation. More ridges in the left hand than in the right hand, whereas for straight people it's the opposite. Spatial abilities in a gay male are similar to a straight female and outscore straight men in memory. Asymmetrical brain in straight men and in lesbian women. Biological differences associated with sexual preference. This chart can be found on page 358 of your textbook. Genetics and homosexuality. In fruit flies, a difference in one gene determines sexual orientation and behavior. In mammals, female fetuses exposed to extra testosterone and male fetuses exposed to low levels of testosterone often grow up with bodies, brains, and faces with traits of the opposite sex. The sexual attraction expected of the opposite sex to one's own sex. As more people are open about their sexual orientation, acceptance may spread thanks to the mere exposure effect. However, the acceptance of gay and lesbian friends and family members does not always translate into general acceptance and vice versa. In the second bullet, okay, so look at the second bullet here. Consequences, other reactions referring to teen pregnancy, STIs, and the quote in the text from the 1982 child rearing expert. Promiscuous recreational sex poses certain psychological, social, health, and moral problems that must be faced realistically. Sex in a love relationship has been found to be more emotionally and sexually satisfying than without.